Good morning from Manila and welcome to the latest Asian Impact webinar from the Asian Development Bank. I'm Rose Marquez from ADB's Philippines Country Office and I will be your moderator for today. We thank you all for joining us as we launch the Asian Development Outlook 2020 update through this interactive webinar. This webinar is streaming live on ADB's official Facebook page. Just search at Asian Dev Bank on Facebook. To give you a brief background, the Asian Development Outlook, or ADO, is a twice-yearly publication of ADB. It provides deep analyses of recent developments in the region, including the outlook for growth, inflation, and the current account, as well as risks to the outlook. Each ADO report also has a special theme chapter on the development issue. In this latest report, the theme chapter is on wellness in Asia, a very timely topic in light of the health crisis affecting the region and the world. To discuss this timely report, we have with us today ADB's Chief Economist and Director General of the Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department, Yasuyuki Sawada, who will present the summary findings of the ADO update. ADB Director for Macroeconomics Research, Abdul Abiad, who supervises the ADO report series, will be joining the discussion later to help answer questions from the attendees. We want to make this a lively discussion, so I'll kick off with a few questions after Yasu's presentation, but we would like to hear from you, our audience. So you may type your questions into the Q&A box, which you can find on the right side of your screen or at the bottom. Please do give a thumbs up or click like on questions already in the box, and we will address the most popular questions first. At this point, let me now turn over to Yasu for his presentation. Yasu.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Rose. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today's webinar from all over the world. Let me start with the summary of key messages, which is summarized in the next slide. There are five key messages of Asian Development Outlook update this time. First, because of COVID-19 pandemic, developing Asia will contract by minus 0.7% this year. This will be the region's very first contraction in 6 decades. Growth will rebound to 6.8% next year, 2021. But as we discussed in this report, this only implies a partial recovery, not the full one. Second, the regional downturn is broad-based. About 3/4 of regional economies are expected to post negative growth this year. The region's largest economy, the People's Republic of China, is an important exception as it forecasts to post positive growth. Third, depressed demand and low oil prices will offset various supply disruptions to keep regional inflation to 2.9% in 2020, and inflation will fall further to 2.3% 2021. And fourth, the main risk to the outlook stems from the possibility of a prolonged COVID-19 pandemic, either extended waves or recurrent waves, which could derail the recovery. And as Rose briefly mentioned, the theme chapter of this report is titled Wellness in Warring Times. The theme chapter documents state of the wellness in Asia, show that wellness sector is a large and growing part of regional economy, and discusses how policymakers can promote wellness, which is one of the components of UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and which will be crucial to the region's post-pandemic recovery. So in the next slide, I'd like to provide a quick update on the COVID-19 pandemic itself, both globally and regionally, as the main force shaping the outlook. Left chart shows the number of new daily cases around the world. As of end August, both Latin America and developing Asia, the purple line and the blue lines, Asia is blue lines, were experiencing about 80,000 new cases daily, and there is no sign of declining. And a right chart showing within Asia pandemic situation, different stages across economies and subregions we can see from this right chart. And these charts, please note that these charts, both left and right charts are on log scale. So small difference is indeed a big difference. But anyway, right chart showing the within region variation. South Asia is now epicenter within the region, accounting for more than 75,000 of developing Asia's new daily cases. There are about 6,000 cases daily in Southeast Asia, 1,500 in Central Asia, less than 500 in East Asia, and now about 10 cases daily in Pacific. And within each sub-region, there is a substantial variation as well. So next slide showing that in response to the outbreaks, Asian governments impose a range of containment measures, their stringency differing across economies and over time. Left chart show the level of containment policy stringency. And as we can see, around the mid-March to April, almost all the countries started imposing somewhat stringent containment measures. And we also see regional variation. South Asia in the middle is a darker color, meaning a more stringent content policy imposed overall. And also within each region, we see a somewhat different level of stringency and timeline. And also overall, we see these colors are getting lighter, meaning many countries started reopening the economy to some extent. And right chart showing mobility of the people and economic growth. Actually, if government imposes a very stringent containment policy, people's mobility is really restricted. This turns into slowing down of economic activity. That relationships can be shown from the positive relationship between mobility, vertical access, and economic growth. Horizontal access mobility and vertical access economic growth. Right chart clearly shows there is a positive relationship. So these are the internal situation. What about the external situation? Next slide shows the pandemic also affected external economic activity. So next slide, slide number 5. Regional and global trade actually plunged, as we can see from the left chart export and the right chart imports. This collapse was even bigger for trade of the developed economies and global economy. And the blue line or green line shows the developing Asia also is not the exception. However, developing Asia's trade decline was milder than other regions around the globe. And Asia's imports declined by 12% year on year in May. But now there is a sign of a picking up. So part of this, late picking up of growth, especially export and import, especially for developing Asia, can be attributed to exports of health supplies and equipment, particularly by PRC, and also increased electronics export by some regional economies, including PRC and Taipei, China. So after seeing domestic situation and also external situation, slide 6 summarize overall economic activities. Yellow dots shows the growth rate in 11 major economies in the region we put here in this chart. And each country or economy, we have two numbers, two bar chart. Left is data for 2019. And the right one is first half of 2020. So across the board, we can see GDP growth was lower in the first half of this year if we compare with the last year. And also, we decompose this growth slowdown by domestic demand component. Private consumption shown in orange, that play a critical role. And also blue part, which is shown by blue part, which is an investment. And we can see especially India. So from the second segment from the left, and also a middle Philippines, a blue part is quite large. So meaning that not only consumption decline, but also investment decline attributed to overall growth slowdown. Next chart showing that the Asian government quickly moved with a wide range of crisis response to tackle not only domestic, but also external demand slowing down. These figures are based on ADB's COVID-19 policy database. Estimated value of policy support packages announced to the end of August showing in this chart. And we have this COVID-19 policy database, which has been updated twice a month. Latest figure, end of August, shows the aggregated package is as high as 3.6 trillion US dollars, and which is about 15% of regional GDP. And also we can see blue component, which is income support, direct government support to income and the revenue, which is about half, and another half is devoted into liquidity and credit support. Also, we can see there are some significant differences. But we see all over the Asia, countries started putting out quite large-scale crisis response. And the next chart showing that what's the impact on financial markets. Policy actions both within and outside the region helped indeed stabilize the financial market. So left-hand side chart shows the capital inflow and capital outflow. Capital inflow is positive and capital outflow negative. Left chart, we can see in March, we had a quite rapid capital outflow. However, this is soon stabilized. And right chart, regional equity market index also fell down in March, but soon after quickly recovered. So this indicates policy actions, swift policy actions by regional government seems to help soften the negative impact on the financial market. So having seen different components, we can now talk about the overall growth trajectory. Despite the policy support and indications that things have bottomed out, given the size of a Q2 contraction, we now project developing Asia's growth, showing a solid red line, to contract by 0.7% this year, so minus 0.7% this year. Down 2.9 percentage point from a 2.2% growth forecast in April ADO 2020. As I mentioned also, this is first regional contraction since the early 1960s. Regional growth is forecast to rebound to 6.8% in 2021, left chart we can see, but this will leave the level of GDP next year substantially below pre-COVID-19 expectation, as we can see from the right chart. So right chart showing a trajectory of developing Asia and Pacific growth levels. So we can see sharp stagnation, and then picking up next year. But we don't expect full regional recovery. And shape of recovery is not V-shaped. But as we can see from the right chart again, rather L-shaped recovery or a S-shaped recovery we can see from the right chart. So next chart, next slide summarizes sub-regional performance. As this table shows, downturn in developing Asia is really broad-based. All economies 2020 forecasts have been downgraded relative to the April ADO, Asian Development Bank's ADO forecast, and 3/4 of the regional economies, 33 out of 46 development member countries' economy will contract this year. And yet there is a substantial variation in growth outlook across region, as we can see from this table. India's forecast revision from 4%, positive 4% to minus negative 9% is most notable. India's number can be seen from the top right segment. You can also observe large contraction in tourism-dependent economies, such as Fiji, right end, and also Thailand, left end, we see Thailand encounter negative downward revision of growth rate. On the other side, some economies are expected to still post a positive growth this year, including PRC, top left, and Taipei, China, also top left in East Asian segment. And also Vietnam in Southeast Asia shown in left bottom. So this is a sub-regional picture. So next slide, now we can see two largest economies in the region, China and India. Variations in economic prospect across the region is well illustrated by contrast between developing countries of these two countries. Much of the divergence reflect how the outbreak has evolved in two countries, India and China. Left chart shows newly daily cases in the two countries quite different. PRC, left chart purple, so its outbreak peak in the first quarter. And then since then, PRC, China has been less than 100 new cases daily. So this allows the economy to reopen. And after 6.8% contraction in the first quarter, China's GDP grew now 3.2% in the second quarter. So right chart, purple, you can see a strong rebound of Chinese growth. In contrast, outbreak in India, as we can see from the green chart in the left, intensified since April. Government responded with a very stringent prolonged lockdown, which resulted in the contraction of Indian economy. Right chart, green, shows the contraction of 24% of India in second quarter. And various high-frequency indicators show continued economic weakness. So these are the picture from the two giants. Now, switch the gear to talk about the inflation. Depressed demand and lower oil prices will dampen inflation pressure. As we can see from the left-hand chart, inflation in 2020 for the whole region is expected to remain at 2.9%. As impact of the, falling demand and lower oil prices offset the effects of supply side disruption. This supply side disruption include prior ones such as pork price disruption on the pork due to African swine fever, as well as the newer COVID-19 related supply side disruptions. Regional inflation in 2021 is expected to ease further to 2.3%. Region's current account surplus is expected to remain stable, as we can see from the right chart. The regional current account surplus will hold steady at 1.4% of aggregate GDP this year and also next year. So this is a picture about inflation and current account. So now let me talk about potential risks to the outlook. And these risks remain tilted to downside. The main risk is that COVID-19 is more prolonged, either because the first waves extended in its duration, or we can see second or third waves. Renewed lockdowns will likely to be smarter and localized, but could still strive any recovery by generating further supply and demand side disruption. Another risk is worsening geopolitical tensions, mostly US-China frictions over trade already happening before COVID-19, and also dispute over technology. So these are the large source of risks. So this is the end of outlook part, and now one chart I'd like to spend maybe a couple of minutes talking about the same chapter. Same chapter is about awareness, which is defined as an active pursuit of activities, choices, and lifestyle that leads to a state of holistic health. Wellness is multidimensional and holistic, including physical, mental, emotional, and social dimensions. But particularly physical dimension and mental dimensions are the two key dimensions. Secondly, I'd like to point out wellness is central to development. In fact, this is one of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, SDG number 3, which states that countries should ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for everyone, regardless of income, and at all ages, including young, middle-aged, and elders. And thirdly, COVID-19 has really heightened importance of awareness because the crisis has battered the physical and mental health of Asians. So awareness economy, and also I'd like to point out the awareness economy could be an engine to support the region's recovery from the current COVID-19 crisis. Indeed, awareness is a large and growing part of the regional economy. Pre-COVID-19 situation accounting for 11% of regional GDP as of 2017 and growing by more than 10% annually in recent years. And this chapter concludes by discussing how policymakers can promote wellness to support the post-pandemic recovery, including through creating a healthy living environment, encouraging physical activity and healthy diet, and also enhancing a workplace wellness. So this is a 2-minute summary about the same chapter. With that, I'd like to stop my presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening. So Rose, over to you.
Thank you, Yasu, for your presentation. We will now entertain your questions. So please confine your questions to the report in the Q&A box. You can now type your questions. To get the discussion rolling, let me ask Yasu. Yasu, based on ADB's latest research on the current economic conditions in the region, what do you think will be the impact of COVID-19 on poverty in the region in the short, medium, and long term?
Yes, this is very important. What's the impact on poor segment of the society? Actually, COVID-19 affected all the sectors and all the income groups in this economy, in each country and each economy. But those who are lacking access to digital platform and those who are living very vulnerable situation, in short, the poor people disproportionately affected, and also micro business and small-scale enterprises are disproportionately affected because they are lacking in liquidity to continue even during the lockdown. So in this report, we showed the ADB's analysis, what is a likely impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on number of poor people in developing Asia. If we take $3.2 per day, per person per day as a poverty line, then before COVID-19, the number of poor people in Asia was falling down to 730 million people. But COVID-19 reverted this continuous poverty reduction trend. Again, using a $3.2 per day poverty line, according to our study, 160 or more million people will falling into poor. So non-poor people, more than 160 million will become poor situation. So that's very sharp short-term poverty impact. And having said this, as we envision next year a strong growth rate to 6.8% whole Asia, then we will see this poverty number will again substantially decline, and at least partially going back to a long-term poverty reduction trajectory. So that's according to our study, and if you're interested in, please take a look at our report. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasu. That certainly is a concern. Poverty is a concern. Now, I turn to a question sent in by Professor Takahiro Miao, adjunct professor of economics at the University of Southern California. He asks, don't you think that the Asian region, given its distinctly lower COVID case numbers and death toll per population than other regions in the world, should adopt a more intra-regionally open and more reasonable cost-benefit approach to COVID policies in order not to disregard the equally serious health and economic problems in the region? Maybe Abdul would like to take this question?
Sure, happy to take that, Rose. Oops. Professor Miao's question is very good. I mean, let me start with his one of the points he makes. It's really important to take a comprehensive cost-benefit perspective when analyzing policies. So think about the effects a policy will have on the COVID-19 trajectory, but also think about the other effects it'll have. So there's some policies that generate benefits, but also large costs. So if you think about the current situation, large-scale stay-at-home policies and workplace and school closures, for example, yes, they can help flatten the curve, but they come at a very high economic cost and even health costs because non-COVID mortality and morbidity can rise. There are other policies which, examples of which are, extensive testing, contact tracing, and better isolation and treatment capacity, which are also effective at flattening the COVID-19 curve with much less collateral damage. So in fact, you can think about those as presenting no trade-offs. It's good for COVID-19, but it's also beneficial economically because they allow economies to reopen and coexist with COVID until a vaccine comes along.
Mm-hmm.
Turning to one point that Professor Miao mentioned, it's true that developing Asia has lower COVID-19 mortality rates, and that should be factored in when you do this cost-benefit analysis. Now, does that mean that economies should open up? A counterpoint to that is that many economies in the region have much weaker health systems. And even now, some countries' hospitals are close to full capacity already. Let's just take the Pacific Island economies as an interesting example of this. Most of these economies have avoided having a domestic outbreak, and they've decided to keep their international borders closed despite very high economic costs, because these are tourism-dependent economies, because they've assessed that the risk in terms of if they have an outbreak, the health systems in these countries are very weak. In fact, for serious illnesses, they need to ship patients to other countries. And so, right, so yes, here's an example where it's policymakers have to weigh those. So take that holistic cost-benefit approach, but it's really difficult to generalize across countries. Think about the country-specific situation in determining which policies countries should undertake. Thanks, Rose.
Thanks, Abdul. And you mentioned a vaccine, and we have a few questions here related to that. One question, how do you see the development of a COVID vaccine progressing, and how the finding of the vaccine can impact on the economic forecasts we have just presented today? And similar to that, there's this question about whether the availability of the vaccines were part of the assumptions today. Also, how big of an impact will the availability of the vaccine have in terms of boosting consumer confidence, household consumption, and economic recovery? Abdul Yasu, who would want to take that up?
Yasu, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think vaccine development is quite important. Probably Abdul can explain how we included in our baseline forecast. But this is basically a health crisis, but not caused by fundamental problem of economy. So once the health crisis is effectively contained, we can envision economy all over the world will bounce back to the fairly normal pre-COVID situation. So in this respect, inventing a vaccine, developing vaccine, as well as coming up with very effective treatments, I think these two things are really critical to contain a health crisis. ADB has a research team, not separately from our, health research or health policy team, separately from our economic research team. And this health research team and health policy team has been closely working with other institutions such as the WHO to track the development, scope for development of effective vaccine, and also more importantly, how to deliver vaccines to our developing member countries and economies. So that's the broader background. And as for the baseline assumption of Asian Development Outlook update growth forecast, probably Abdul can quickly respond.
Sure. So the assumptions underlying our forecasts are that there's not going to be a vaccine this year. If anything, the vaccine will be available next year, and it will be available and will be distributed starting next year. How long that'll take, we need to see. The assumption is with the assumption for the forecasts though is that countries will be able to flatten the curve sufficiently using other measures, not the vaccine, but again, sort of sustainable social distancing, uh, testing and tracing, and to allow their economies to open and basically live with COVID-19 until that vaccine comes along. We do highlight in the discussion of risks that there is the upside risk that the vaccine does become available sooner. One needs to temper that with the fact that even if a vaccine does become available sooner, whether it becomes available to developing Asia is another question. So there's this whole issue of vaccine nationalism and the danger that countries compete for who can get the vaccine first. Thanks.
Thanks, Abdul and Yasu. There's another question here for Yasu. Can you comment on the shape of economic recovery for developing countries? Yasu, what do you think? What kind of recovery are we looking at for developing countries?
So as I briefly showed in one of the slides, for the overall developing Asia and Pacific region, shape of recovery in terms of GDP level trajectory, this year we will encounter overall negative growth. And as I said, 33 countries and economies will encounter negative growth. So positive trend of growth turn down to the negative direction. So this is this year. And then next year, we envision somewhat partial but strong recovery next year. So, so this is a pattern, what I call the L-shaped or sooth-shaped recovery or Nike-shaped recovery. So I think most of the economies will qualitatively follow the same pattern this year and next year. But as I also mentioned, there are divergence or heterogeneity across different countries and economy within the region. Particularly a country like India will follow slower shaped recovery because of the COVID-19 cases. Really, daily numbers are still very large, and containment policies are necessary. And also another set of countries, tourism-dependent countries, because of travel ban, these countries and economies are really seriously affected by losing production in travel and tourism sector. And also, actually, I'd like to give you one data. So IATA, International Air Travel Association, IAEA, IATA, has a survey with the passengers. And actually, latest IATA survey shows the people will wait 6 months or even 1 year, even if the travel ban is lifted. So I think that will make a sooth-shaped or L-shaped recovery slower and flatter.
Can I add one thing, Rose?
Go ahead,
Yes.
Abdul.
So it's easy to look at the growth rates next year and think, wow, they're doing really great. One reason, what we need to remember, that one reason the growth rates next year are particularly high is because it's compared to a very weak 2020.
That's
so
right.
This is what economists call a base effect. So which is why you can't just look at the growth rates and say, well, okay, no, they're doing okay. That's why Yasu showed that one chart on the right, which actually shows GDP levels. And what you want to look at, what economists call a V-shaped recovery, is when you have a downturn and then you go back to whatever trajectory you were on before. But as you saw in Yasu's chart, there was still a gap. It's about 4% for the region as a whole, between where we should have been without COVID and where we will be next year with COVID. And so that's why Yasu and others call it, that's why we call it a partial recovery. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Abdul. There's a question here about how COVID-19, how it will impact on the development gaps in the region. How significant will the widening of the gaps be with COVID-19? Any region-wide macroeconomic responses?
Yasu,
Okay.
maybe you can answer. I'm not sure what they mean, what the questioner means by a development gap, but maybe Yasu does.
So probably seeing this, overall across the board negative growth this year, and also even a few countries still maintain a positive growth, but growth numbers are very small. So I think a question is about this may create divergence among the Asia and Pacific region. I think we need to see what will happen, because still situation is there are lots of uncertainty. So we need to watch and see what's going to happen. But what I can say is there are some set of countries and economies achieving rather better recovery trend, and notably PRC successfully contained, as I showed, PRC and India. PRC successfully contained COVID-19. So now country can reopen the economy, and naturally economy will bounce back. And indeed, we see a Q1, Q2, especially Q2 numbers, stronger than we envisioned beforehand. And then on the other hand, India still struggling with large number of COVID cases. So I think that may create divergence of growth. Yes, that possibility we cannot deny, but still, I think we need to see what's going to happen in next few years.
Thank you. Oh,
Can
Abdul?
I add just
Go
very
ahead.
quickly to what Yasu had already said? The COVID-19, it can be temporary. As Yasu was emphasizing, a lot of it boils down to how well countries are able to quickly contain their outbreaks. And the reason for this is also because, apart from reducing the short-term economic impact, the more prolonged your outbreak is, the bigger the potential impact, the impact on long-run potential output. And the reason for this is that this crisis can erode capital, both physical capital, when firms go bankrupt, but also human capital. We have school closures that are now getting prolonged. You have health effects, and these may have long-term impacts. And the longer the pandemic persists, the more intense these can be. And again, it can slow down development progress in many of our economies. Thank you.
Thanks, Abdul. Yasu. There's a burning question about the balancing act, about the health and the economic concerns. There's one question here asking, given the experience over the last 6 months, where managing for health issues only is no longer an option, managing for the economy may be more important going forward now. So what should be the right balance? Do you have any recommendations on what kind of balance should be? Go ahead.
I think that's a very important question. Probably at the beginning, especially at the beginning of COVID-19 outbreak, many hold the view there is a somewhat stronger trade-off between health and the economy. But after 6 months, I would say it's not true. There is no fundamental trade-off between health and economy, especially looking at successful cases of Republic of Korea and People Republic of China and Taipei, China. These countries, especially Korea and Taipei, China, they use the digital platform to undertake smart lockdown. Without pushing, imposing excess burden on the economy. So digital was really helpful to effectively contain and undertake test, trace, and isolation principle of health containment. And meanwhile, economy can be remain open to some level. So I think wisely avoiding trade-off is quite important when we talk about the balance. And in balancing, I think three elements are very important. Health risks, of course, but it can be contained wisely. And then essentiality of the economic activity that should be prioritized when reopening economy. And then economic importance to support the overall economy. So these elements should be carefully considered when considering a balance. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Abdul, anything to add?
No, Yasu said it well, but basically, I guess, it only looks like there's a trade-off when you use blunt instruments like large-scale lockdowns. Because as I said earlier, large-scale lockdowns, yes, can help flatten the curve, but at large economic cost. There are many measures, there are many policy measures available that don't have that trade-off. And more importantly, as Yasu had said earlier, it's first and foremost a health crisis, and you can't get the economy into full recovery mode until you address the health crisis. So the point is very clear. There's really no trade-off unless you're using the wrong instruments.
Yeah, also Abdul mentioned, for example, school closure, that can really effectively contain health and contributing, health measure, contributing, controlling COVID-19 epidemic. But at the same time, this is associated with a very high level of cost, not only a short term, losing, school days for these kids, but also this may generate a long-lasting effect from losing human capital in long run. So I think this economic cost of a containment measure should be carefully considered. And we have lots of lessons we can learn from the different experiences around the Asia, and we can wisely avoid again health economy trade-off.
Thank you to you both. We have a question here from former Philippine Socioeconomic Plan Secretary Ernesto Pernia. He's asking, is there a link between the coronavirus pandemic and climate change? Yasu?
That's a very interesting question. To the best of my knowledge, I don't have yet the scientific evidence showing that the emergence of coronavirus and climate change. I think these new viruses emerging, Ebola epidemic and SARS epidemic, and how that links to climate change. I think a very important, very broad, critical question to ask, but I'm not sure whether we can really establish this causal relationship between climate change and emergence of a new pandemics. But so my answer is I don't know, and but I think this is a very important question. So I hope scientists will come up with a very careful, validated evidence on this. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Yasu. There's a question here also from Victoria Sibal. She's asking, as developing Asia navigates through the realities of living in COVID-19, are there any distinct pockets of growth that countries should capitalize on to better drive economic recovery?
So can you kind of elaborate the question again? So
yeah. She's asking, as developing Asia navigates through the realities of COVID-19, living with COVID-19, are there distinct pockets of growth that countries should capitalize on to better drive economic recovery?
So by nature, COVID-19, we should stay home, and those who can, we should do work from home arrangement. So I think digital infrastructure and digital platform is getting really its importance. So I think a digital-based economy that can be strengthened to leading post-COVID-19 recovery. So I think those areas using a digital platform that can be a potential driver of a stronger recovery. But having said this, then concern is a digital divide. There are people who can capture this opportunity And there are other set of group of people who are lagging behind because of lack of the access. So I think we should really, our government should really carefully, support mitigating this digital divide and resulting inequality. And not only workplace, but also education. Those who can do remote schooling, they can continue education learning to some extent, but those who are lacking in access to internet and remote education, I think they will be seriously lagging behind. So I think this is a digital is area we can strengthen and we can target, or government can target, but at the same time, very careful, some care is needed for softening digital divide.
Abdul, anything to add?
No, Yasu's answer is good.
All right.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you, Yasu.
Thank you.
Another question here asking, is it possible that an accelerated shift of supply chain from China to Southeast Asia will be seen after the pandemic?
So indeed, that's an excellent question. So before COVID-19, we already saw shifting supply chain or production out of China to non-China. And this has been partly triggered by US-China trade tension. Now already 2 years have passed. And so basically electronics products and other manufacturing products are moving out of China to non-China, especially Southeast Asian countries. And light industry, labor-intensive light industry, such as ready-made garment, apparel products, and clothes production shifting out of China to other countries such as Bangladesh. So we see this trend, and it seems COVID-19 really accelerate to somewhat accelerate this trend of moving out of China. And that will make some gradual change in, continue to make gradual structural changes of supply chain network, I think.
Okay, thank you, Yasu. Another question, with the unprecedented fiscal stimulus across the region, will high debt become a concern for countries, for developing countries?
So I can say two things. That's a very important question, a large concern, because as I said, 3.5 trillion US dollars stimulus package already, our member countries announced and started implementing, which is a 15% of GDP. That's a massive scale fiscal as well as a monetary policies. I'd like to mention quickly two things. First, pre-COVID-19 situation, government debt GDP situation, if we take a measure of government debt GDP, many Asian countries have been undertaking a prudent fiscal management. So thanks to this prudent management, debt GDP ratio kept a relatively low level. Philippines is about 20% debt GDP ratio, public debt GDP ratio. That's quite manageable and quite a good level. So pre-COVID-19 situation, many governments had some fiscal space to expand expenditure. And so that's the one thing. And secondly, I'd like to mention during the COVID-19 situation, because of the nature of lockdown or stringent containment, government has been and also will play a key role to maintain individual families' livelihood, and also especially micro and small enterprises. In spite of a lockdown, they have to keep their business alive so that they can reopen quickly once health risk is contained. So in that respect, government fiscal measures and also monetary measure to provide liquidity for small scale and micro enterprises is very, very critical. So I think at this stage, it's very important to undertake expansionary policy, in spite of the fact that this policy will inevitably enhance overall public debt. I think that this is very important. And then keeping economy alive, Soon after, health is health risk is contained, economy can recover back, and then later, a few years later, or a couple of years later, government can envision how to handle this accumulated debt. So otherwise, I think economy cannot be sustainable overall. So this is indispensable, inevitable. I want to say necessary evil, but it's kind of necessary evil. We have to have looming debt so that we can maintain our economy.
Thank you, Yasu. And there's this a very popular question on the Philippines. The question is, can you elaborate further on the stable 2021 Philippine forecast of 6.5% growth? Would sluggish employment numbers have less bearing on in 2021? Abdul, would you like to take this question on the Philippines?
Sure. Thanks very much, Rose. So, things will improve next year again. So the assumption is that we will be able to contain the outbreak here in the Philippines. And you have substantial fiscal and monetary policy support for the economy. And then again, the big thing is that consumption and investment will likely be better than they are this year. And so that'll provide a boost. And the external environment will also likely improve next year. So that'll be a boost to exports. One of the important export sectors for the Philippines is semiconductors, and we're already seeing a pickup in the global semiconductor market. It was a really bad year last year, and it's been improving this year, and hopefully that'll continue. We are already seeing this. Yasu had mentioned, he had shown in the one slide on trade that one of the reasons why Asia is doing relatively better than the rest of the region is electronics, and so that will a recovery in global in semiconductors in particular will be supportive for Philippine growth next year. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Abdul. There is a question here on in particular related to the theme chapter. It is encouraging to note that the wellness industry will help contribute to the recovery in pursuing multiplier effects on the overall economy. Which sectors and industries are expected to contribute significantly and thus are supported by governments and MDBs? Anybody would like to take that? Yasu?
So policymakers, for example, Asians have a tradition to go to the parks and public, facilities during the weekends, and so this is the one area government can support, this recreation infrastructure to maintain wellness, and also government together with the private sector set a better working environment, workplace wellness. I think that can be strengthened. So and also education for young children. I think government play a very important role in order to keep wellness of school age kids. Because some countries suffering, like Indonesia, are suffering from so-called double burden of malnutrition. On one hand, there are people, especially kids, undernourished kids. But at the same time, because of getting richer, there is obesity and overweighted problem. So this double burden of nutrition, I think government can play a very important role to guide people's livelihood so that overall welfare can be improved substantially. So I think government can do a lot of things from infrastructure, education, up to more elaborated programs.
All right. Thank you so much, Yasu. We have a lot of questions on the Q&A box. So unfortunately, we have limited time. Let me ask this question from RJ Ronald Hosmilio. Yasu, what is your advice to small and medium enterprises in order to cope up with the unprecedented money loss due to COVID-19? I guess the concern really is how SMEs will survive.
Yes, we so after outbreak of COVID, we started doing surveys of micro, medium scale, and micro, small, and medium scale enterprises in few ASEAN countries, including Philippines. And according to this survey, clearly showing that small and micro enterprises suffering from lack of liquidity to continue their business because shut down and closing down, they lost revenue. So how to maintain their shops and business? According to our study, a large proportion of respondents said they have only 1 month's liquidity. So I think government play a very important role. So I think government programs should make these micro and small enterprises to survive by injecting directly or indirectly some type of liquidity, and also some type of financial forbearance programs can be designed to make these firms and the business alive. So that's very important, not only for business per se, but also employees who are also, micro enterprises who are tended to be lower income and poor. So in order to keep this workforce alive and also business alive, I think government play a very important role in this perspective. So again, this is also linked to a debt question. So government intervention, government needs really large scale resources, but this is really indispensable component to keep business, especially poorer and more vulnerable segment of society alive. So I think this is very critical, indispensable component. Yeah.
Mhm. All right. Thanks, Yasu. There's a question on job losses. Question goes, ADB gave projections in April that COVID will threaten the employment of 52 million workers in China, while the rest of the region must brace itself for job cuts if the outbreak goes on until September. We are already in September. Any updates on the job losses if this goes on until next year? What do you think would be the likely case?
So right now we didn't update. So that report we put out before on economic assessment of COVID-19, we set the 3-month scenario. I think we put out them in May. So we at that time we set the 3-month scenario and also 6-month scenario. And 6-month scenario is already reaching the deadline. And according to this our study, more than 100 million people losing a job in developing Asia. And so updating, actually, we plan to update not necessarily job impact, but economic impact assessment. We are now doing re-estimating overall economic impact, and it's upcoming October or November. But another report we just published 2-3 weeks ago with ILO, International Labour Organization, we found overall huge amount of losses. Job will be lost due to COVID-19 and associated, government containment measures. But at the same time, we found this joint study with ILO. We found younger population disproportionately affected. So not only keeping employment, overall employment, but also I think focused and differentiated approach, focusing on younger workers and keeping them doing well and maintaining their human capital, and even enhancing human capital by a wide variety of technical and vocational training. I think that's very important, even under this COVID-19 situation. So, so updated number for overall economic crisis, we will release next month or month after. Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Yasu. We have several more questions, but unfortunately, we've run out of time. So we apologize to our participants if we didn't get to some of your questions. Time is not on our side today. Thank you so much, Yasu and Abdul. That was a truly rich and fruitful discussion today. Just a reminder to all, Thank you, Yasu. Just a reminder to all that the Asian Development Outlook 2020 update report is now downloadable for free on the ADB website, www.adb.org. The next Asian Impact webinar will be on 29 September, 2 p.m. Manila time. The webinar will discuss the digital transformation in the post-COVID-19 world and will be hosted by James Villafuerte, Senior Economist of ADB's Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department. Until then, thank you all for joining today's session. Have a good day. Stay safe.